Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session, which really gets to the nitty-gritty of violins. Just how nitty-gritty we get will depend on the people on my left, and it's Johannes Leuthold, who's here from Zurich, and Dick Panting from Auckland and Australia. Both of them are involved in making violins, selling and buying violins, and a very different perspective from each of them, and we'll find out more as we go along. Now, it's a bit tricky having dealers on the stage, because when we talk about the violin business, it's really a bit like jewellery, and it's a bit like paintings. There's a lot of nasty behind the scenes going on. So I'm sure that we have two very honourable gentlemen here who will tell us how it's really supposed to be done if you're going to buy a violin. So first of all, I'll ask Johannes, and he's a special guest because he arranged for a Guadagnini violin for Sir Michael, one you've heard already today probably, and Sir Michael did his homework to find out where he should go to get a particular violin, and the homework led to this man here in Zurich. So he's got good credentials, Michael. Yes, great. So let's get into the discussion and find out. Well, first of all, I'd like to know, Johannes, how did you get into violin dealership, or did violin making come first?
Not very special. Grown up in a musical family, and very fascinated about the voice quality, the variety of instruments that was about thing. Started to be a violin maker, specializing in restoration, and coming with that step into dealing with instruments. Yes.
And Dick, you'll start. You're a professional violinist, or you still are. So.
Well, not anymore. But I was always fascinated in how things work, and in Melbourne, where I ended up living in 1990. I'd been freelancing around Australian orchestras, and at some point there was an opportunity to work in a friend's violin shop for a little while, and I discovered very quickly that I didn't actually want to run a violin shop, but I was fascinated in the business of making an instrument, and so eventually I made a small workshop and equipped it, and then I went to find a friend who was a violin maker here in New Zealand, to actually spend 3 summers working and making instruments there.
Is anybody in the volunteer fire brigade here?
Yeah. And one thing led to another. Eventually I made a few instruments because I was mainly playing in those days, and I got occasional orders and slowly more orders, and I decided that I had to stop playing because I wasn't practicing in the same way I was accustomed to. And to make a violin, you actually have to put in hours at a workbench, and it requires a lot of hours. So gradually I made the decision to stop playing professionally, and that's what I did. And I always felt I could go back if I needed to. If I made a complete mess of it, I could go back to perhaps playing. But so far I'm doing what I'm doing.
Making, restoring and selling violins, and of course there aren't too many people in New Zealand doing that, so probably it's a business that can be sustained.
There are quite a few, more than you would imagine,
really?
Actually.
Yep.
And of course we have a very small population base compared to most other countries in the world where classical music is played. So yeah, it's not an easy business, but there obviously is work.
Johannes, in Europe, of course, there are violin makers. It's huge, colossal. So to break into that, weren't you afraid that that it was just too busy? There were just too many people in the business.
When I started to be a violin maker, this was a profession nobody wanted to do. It was a complete change, I believe, in the 80s, 90s, because the violin making business was not known to get a good salary. So that was not of any importance for my choice. No.
But at the point you made violins,
Yeah.
So what made you then become a dealer in violins?
and a very simple base. I was thinking if we have to do researches on techniques and also research on the history of violin making, we have to get some money, because while you are doing your researches, you don't work. And the money was simply not enough to take time off and travel and being in museums and grabbing in dossiers and stuff. And that was my main focus, was to actually finance the workmanship on the other side, yeah.
In times gone by, a violin dealer wouldn't be expected to go and do such historical research as you would now. Perhaps it makes the difference between somebody who's successful and who's not now.
I think you have both. You have a couple people who are completely serious what they're doing and offering fiddles and try to give their best what's about the provenience, about the history, about all the natural science of options we have today, which are very expensive to run, like computer tomography, like multispectrum analysis, and you need all these scientific educated people to help you. But there is people out to answer your questions who really do a serious job, and then you have, like everywhere, people who are interested in dealing violins with other motives, yeah.
Dick, how does a young violinist wanting to buy a violin avoid these pitfalls of people who are in it really to make money and don't care about the scruples?
Well, I suppose one factor for a lot of people, especially in this part of the world, is that young violinists generally don't have anything like the sort of money to approach a really well-known, famous dealer and ask for a very well-known violin, or a violin by a very well-known maker, because already, you know, they're just way out of their reach. And I actually started getting commissions for instruments, or approaches for instruments, simply because as a new maker starting out, my prices were very low, and the quality was good enough that people would say, you know, I've tried violins up to a certain price range and I can't find anything, and I like the sound of your instrument, and it's affordable. And I think now the whole, as Johannes said, the whole game has changed hugely in the last 30 years, because there are an increasing number of violin making schools where people can go and study the real history and the techniques of making. Usually they're motivated, they're much better educated than people were 300 years ago, naturally. And there's been a resurgence, I think, among young people in actually doing things with their hands. So there are an increasing number of really well-trained violin makers out there in the world who are making affordable instruments that students who don't necessarily have very much money can actually buy and use for a number of years to even get into a professional career. And of course then you get the very well-known modern makers who have achieved great distinction, and increasing numbers of soloists are finding these instruments very acceptable for concert use as well, and they don't come with a huge insurance bill at the end of the year. And you know, possibly they're a little bit more reliable than the sort of daily travel or the yearly travel that most busy musicians have to do these years.
Johannes, I take it that you deal a lot in newish violins. You're not into entirely the old masters, are you? In spite of all this research, there are so many makers these days. You would try and find the reputable ones and sell their violins?
Yes, we have a program, and as the demand on budget fiddles on a sort of a $20,000 to $50,000 violins has raised, and there is a lot to purchase these fiddles, but people are sort of confused about the number of offer. So we try to offer the top instruments, recommend them, and it's a very, very good program, yeah.
How can you guarantee a violin you sell has a true provenance. You can say, well, this is exactly what it's supposed to be.
You're talking about the old ones, right?
Well, beyond a certain age, they start to have a particular value.
Yeah.
Don't they? Yes.
I mean, we really do all the scientific options you have today, and that would include dendrochronological analysis on the top of the fiddle. We use computer tomography. We use also multispectrum and 9-spectrum forensic lamps. And apart from that, documentation which are today connected with the best people in the world to deliver all the data we have, corners, purfling, arching, measurements, and that is how we do it. All the essential information to offer to the one who buys a fiddle. There is not more. So that's how we offer the instrument to someone who is interested to buy it with these guarantees, yes.
Dick, one of the judges said just a while ago that a violin is a living thing, timber is a living thing, it needs to be played. How do you go about sourcing the right timber, the right wood for a start, to start this cycle?
Well, traditionally, still violins pretty much everywhere in the world are made with the timbers that they started being used even 400 years ago, which is spruce for the top, which is a light, very strong wood that resonates very fast, and so is ideal for the soundboard of an instrument. And you find spruce in the tops of violins and all the string family. They're also in the soundboard of pianos, of either uprights or grand pianos. They're in guitars as well. People don't realize that even jazz guitars have to sound acoustically, and spruce is an ideal material. There are lots of murmurings from people that the highest quality wood that was available 300 years ago is now very difficult to find. And in certain circumstances that's true, but I think every violin maker eventually finds a source of timber that's acceptable. And I think there's probably, my opinion anyway, is that the actual craftsmanship and the design of the instrument, there are many different models, even variations on the Stradivari, Guarneri sort of stereotypes, that actually play a more important role in determining the fundamental character of the instrument. Yeah.
Okay. Johannes, have you come across some of the old violins that over the years have been altered to suit different requirements, to make them louder, make them stronger? Obviously different strings today from 300 years ago, but are there other things that have been done to fiddles to change what they do, and you have to pick this up if it's going to be a historical instrument?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, the taste of the time has the violin makers all over the world had to try to serve that taste. Whether they started with it or whether it was the reaction of the always bigger concert halls and other aspects like the recording, that's a good question. But as we know today, there's very, very few violins left in the world, and most violin makers never had the chance to see, especially to hear them, which have never been opened and I would say worked on then or even manipulated to make them into the taste of what is today required, yes.
But you could find a violin now that hasn't been altered.
We have sometimes luck to find or that we run into a fiddle in its complete original shape and status, and it's one of the most, I think, important experience for a violin maker to hear a fiddle in its absolute original condition, because it's a complete different message.
What sort of alteration would you expect to find in a historical instrument that has been altered over time? What sorts of things are done to it?
Usually it has been manipulated in the thicknesses, yes.
Made thinner? Can only be made thinner.
Yes, yes, absolutely. The old instruments, including the Guarneris, you find they have thicker backs, and there's only 2 left, and the others, they're all shaped. Yeah, that's one of the sad story on violin making or old violin dealing or condition, yeah. Because most violin makers don't know even themselves, yeah.
Dick, do you get requests from people to make a violin that does a certain range of things? I mean,
Not me personally, but of course with the increasing interest in historically informed performance, a lot of instruments that were altered in some ways are now being reconverted back in certain dimensional respects, so that they can be played at the old pitch, which is better suited to the historically informed performance. And following on what Johannes said about thicknesses, perhaps a lot of people who love the music, don't know so much about violins, don't realize that with the changing tastes of music, moving from the Baroque era through into classical and then the Romantic, the violin was also forced to be adapted to a greater range of pitch. Most Baroque compositions probably only encompassed 2.5 octaves, and now modern virtuoso violins use the full 4 and a bit octaves that's possible, and even more if you play with harmonics. And that necessitated a longer string length, and to achieve that, the neck of the violin was lengthened. But in order to lengthen that neck, you actually have to perform an operation. You remove the head, which is very much like the fingerprint of the maker, and very distinctive in the style of the instrument, and a new neck is grafted carefully onto that head, and then fastened into the body of the instrument at the right, or the desired length. With the change in pitch from a lower pitch, sort of roughly more or less a semitone higher now than perhaps when Strad's time, necessitated changing the reinforcement inside the violin to counter the increased pressure of the strings, the newer strings as well. A longer string exerts more pressure at a certain pitch. So the bass bar, which is a longitudinal strut inside the violin, inside the top of the violin, had to be lengthened and also deepened so that it provided a stronger beam. And if you're changing the violin back to old pitch, then most violin makers would want to change the bass bar back to something lighter, because it alters the response of the instrument and makes it more suitable for the production with a different bow, and also using gut strings again.
but you can't just change a violin backwards and forwards, because that's a huge job to take a violin apart and remake it like that.
No, I think anybody who played both instruments and wanted to play in a historically informed group or solos would have 2 instruments. And and also, of course, it's a very different playing technique, and there are people who, and increasing numbers today of instrumentalists who like to do both, and it's a sort of versatility that wasn't envisaged 50 years ago for performers.
Johannes, do you have this request of violins, ones that will play adequately or professionally and historically informed Baroque instruments? Do you have a request for those as well as the modern symphonic instrument?
Because many musicians are really largely interested to perform on various works and various periods, can go up to jazz or whatever, yes. And it connects, it's the same story. I think one shouldn't divide it too strong. The tendency anyway goes now not to play completely on a Baroque style fiddle, but maybe with a bridge or a tailpiece. Now that is a very interesting and very important field to be largely interested in. What's the performance, including what we are doing, trying to adjust what the individual wants, yeah.
Now here's the thing, fashion plays a part in music as well as every other part of life. So a particular kind of violin is a fashion, which I suppose to make a living you have to respond to. Have you seen fashions change and people's requirements of a violin or the type of violin they want?
Yes, I see positive changes absolutely in a new making world. I mean, fiddles and bows are made on a high level of quality, and that is a very positive trend, that people not think what's old is good. And that is a change, yeah, definitely. You have out there such talented people now, and they know what they do, yeah.
Richard, is there much mass production of violins? That's probably a very silly question.
Yeah, well, I think probably from the middle of the 1800s or even a little bit earlier, there's been serial production in workshops of instruments, and Johannes and I were talking about this earlier on, and going back to Stradivari's time and general woodworking shops of that period. Stradivari himself had his own two sons, worked from their apprentice days with him until he died, and they continued the workshop as old men for a number of years, or not so many years, but a few years after he died. And during that time, working life of over 70 years, there would have been many violin makers and apprentices and other people working. I think any violin maker today recognizes that you don't make in excess of 700. I mean, the figures vary because instruments are not always easily available for counting, but the consensus seems to be that there are sort of between 500 and 600 Stradivarius in existence today, and the output of his workshop, including violins, violas, cellos, and he even made harps at one point, is sort of in excess of 1,000, possibly up to 1,300, 1,400 instruments. One person, even with 200 years, probably would find it difficult to make that number of instruments solely by themselves. And so, there's always been a collaborative
farm out various parts of the fiddle.
And in the, as the Industrial Revolution sort of overtook manufacturing processes in other fields, it moved into violin making as well. And I went quite a few years ago to an exhibition of Violin instruments, who was the foremost dealer and maker in the French, in Central Europe, I suppose, in the 1800s, and saw in this exhibition pre-routed violin plates made on the, with powered by presumably a steam engine, and later on certainly that was the practice in factory violins, or factories that made violins even before 1900. So in mass production, as the industrial landscape changed, there's always been some form of production going on for cheaper ranges of instruments.
Johannes, what makes a violin fail? I know low humidity is one of its great enemies, but what is the biggest thing that needs to be repaired? What goes wrong with a violin more often?
Yeah, it's dramatic climate change, what you're saying, like dry or humid, and particularly the fast changes. Of course, air conditioning, which are defined by a certain relation between humidity and temperature. So it's amazing if you think that the violins we play today from the classic area, if you remember maybe a tool which is 300 years old and it's still under big stress, it's absolute wonder, this little box, where it goes, what it can do, and how much it has to take. Like the musicians told before, they would travel an immense stress on the instrument. Guess just the near travel, the climate, what I said before, and the pollution in the air by heating. This has changed so dramatically, so the restorer's work has become so challenging of keeping those instruments as much as you can, because they are old. They're really old. Yeah.
And when you think of one of the judges touring the world with their Strad or whatever, think of all the climatic and different places that they go with them, and the violin's supposed to stand up to all of that. Yeah. And still be played.
I mean, Chrysler was mentioned today. You see these wonderful romantic photos, him standing on the boat between Europe and America. if you think that was not any stress for the fiddle, it has its wonderful climate, it was humid, it took time to go from one post to the other. You think the same procedure 60 years, 70 years later on an air trip from London Heathrow Airport to New York, John F. Kennedy. You think it's amazing. Air pressure, pollution, climate, anything, and modern cosmetics, which are the newest challenge we have faced as restorers. Very complex chemistry, yeah.
Has anybody in the audience a question they'd like to ask these gentlemen? This is your chance. I'll just repeat the question briefly for the people who are watching on the web because they might not have heard you. I think the question was about using modern materials in place of the old materials, the old glues, the old varnishes. Are there substitutes today, or can you still use some of the original materials? That was the gist of your question. Is there an advantage using old materials?
Yes, absolutely, and modern science has shown so many scientific results on that. So the good makers and the good restorer, they hang in a lot of results of the restoration of painting, where you have universities, countries which invest a lot of money in the research on pigments, in the research of proteins. So that has been in our field. Before it wasn't that developed, but the natural the natural chemistry is being used largely. I think we have maybe a 1% to the 1.5% of new synthetics chemistry we're using, and it has to be always resolvable, which is a basic of restoration. There is a couple, but the old ones do pretty well.
And they're still available?
Still available by the fact of painting restoration, I would say mainly, yeah.
Any other question? Yes? The question is the violinist's relationship with the instrument. How do you get that relationship with a new violin, isn't it? How do you build that relationship? That's what you're talking about?
Well, I can't speak for all violin makers. In my case, if someone commissions an instrument, it's always on the understanding that they have a period of time after they've received it, that they can try it, put it through any test, get familiar with it for a period of months, and in that time hopefully we'll stay in contact and make adjustments if necessary, and they always are in the case of a new instrument. And I'm always happy to offer a total money-back guarantee if in the end of that period the player can't be satisfied. Happily that happens very rarely, I think once in my experience so far. But I think one of the positive things about having a new violin as opposed to having an old violin which has an illustrious history is that if you look at it from a different perspective, you can see it as a blank canvas on which you can, with which you can, or an object with which you can establish a relationship. And it's, as all the jury members said, it's mostly about, very much mostly about the performer. When the audience hear a great performance, the violin is the tool, and the violin can enhance or make the job of the performer easier, or take them in unexpected directions. But a new violin of quality will only develop with time and with loving playing. And I think that's, for a lot of players, that's a very rewarding journey to make.
Does that answer your question? Yes. Anybody else? Yes. The questions about modern violins being made to the same standard as a Strat. Johannes.
Well, I think that the musicians before the judge did answer that question from their side, and I was happy that they did so. Many tests, like one of the members said, showed that that a modern violin of high quality is pretty near to one of the good violins from the classic period. I think one thing is important to say: among really top players and people who are interested in to play various fiddles who are known for their quality, there is a couple handful of top fiddles which really professionals from both sides agree that is almost unbeatable. But it's a very small number. These fiddles are known and put the standard of there where any new maker wants to get. I think Richard would agree on that. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, Richard, Johannes, Richard, you model your violins on a particular standard, which is a classical standard, am I right?
Yeah. I mean, violin making, like a lot of woodworking crafts, is traditionally been a conservative one. The evolution of the violin is quite different, and stringed instruments in general was quite a different path from that taken by other orchestral instruments, bass and woodwind. And I won't bore you with all of the differences, but relatively quickly in historical terms, the violin reached its, what we can see with hindsight as an ideal shape and strength of construction that's allowed its continued use over 300 years with modifications and still be fully acclaimed for its quality.
The violin's being asked to do today what it was never intended to do
That's
300
right,
years ago,
yeah.
but
And
it survived.
And a lot of people, I mean, if an engineer looks at a violin, it's quite obvious that in some respects it's very over-engineered for the job it has to do, which is probably why it has survived these hundreds of years. I'm sorry, I forgot the very first part of the question.
Well, it's about the old violins being made today in the same pattern today.
Yes.
And
sorry, what I was going to say is that because this ideal shape was found really by empirical experimentation relatively early on, makers subsequently, especially when a maker like Stradivari becomes known in his lifetime, and it's only natural that a lesser maker will say, okay, he's doing something right, I'll copy it. And of course there's no copyright on the shape of the violin. So these instruments, and as they became even more famous, played by great players, they set the standard for instrument makers all around the world to emulate and hopefully sort of reach that level. And I think we can say safely that the standard of craftsmanship that is being practiced by the best makers today is easily on a level of excellence, technical excellence, and generally probably over a broader spectrum than the older makers, which is understandable because we have so many more tools available. I mean, not only mechanical tools, but the electronic tools, the measuring, the research tools. And people are educated today to a level where they can make use of this material and information. But nevertheless, music is music, and we like to hear Beethoven played in a way that is comprehensible to us, even if it's historically informed. And a violin is a violin, it produces a violin sound. If you want to make it sound like a trombone, then you make something that's not a violin. And ultimately, I think there are plateaus in culture, in various fields, where you reach a level which is not perfection, nothing's ever perfect, but reach a level which satisfies all the requirements of the society that is making music or painting or whatever, and perhaps changes in cultural attitudes will then lead in a different direction, which will makers of whatever instrument is in question have to follow, or will follow eventually.
Well, the violin must be successful because it stayed in its current form pretty well for 300 years. If you trace the 300 years before that and go to different parts of the world and see the precursors to the modern violin, there were changes and differences of every kind until suddenly, in Italy, this particular form evolved, and it's pretty well stayed like that. The fact that it hasn't changed means we've reached the epitome, the zenith, or something.
Certainly, I'd say a sort of much more level plateau. The plateaus aren't always level exactly, but yeah.
Well, it's about time we wound the session up, but I'll ask these gentlemen here for a final comment if there's something they would like to add. You anything, Johannes, you'd like to add? You've had huge international experience in this field.
Well, I like the last question from this gentleman over there about the new and the old ones. And I think one fact we shouldn't forget, if someone goes on a stage on a Brahms concerto and he plays it, there's no one else who plays it with another fiddle. So most of the solo repertoire is representative for the quality of a fiddle. Of course, it is always in a different form in the chamber music or in an orchestra or a chamber orchestra form. So it would need so much competence of people to judge a fiddle when the fiddle starts from the beginning, its concerto as a solo instrument. So, and many checks have proven that. I mean, there's always been very excellent players, for some reason, whatever, take another fiddle, playing the concerto, and people would comment, oh, your Stradivari is just the biggest instrument I could imagine. It sounded so well. And he would say afterwards in the wardrobe, Johannes, I play with my new instrument.
Dick, have you got a final comment?
No, I agree with that. I mean, obviously as a maker, I do have a bias, but as a player, I've heard many of the wonderful soloists of our time play on presumably their wonderful instruments, and certain instruments I know for sure they're playing those instruments. But just a small anecdote, I was many years ago in a workshop of a well-known and famous maker in New York who made a violin for Ricci, or made a violin, and Ricci tried it and said, oh, this is wonderful, can I take it on tour? And the maker said, of course, and this was a long overseas trip for Ricci. Came back and apparently said to the maker, Louis, you better stop your day job, I've got you 6 orders. And he took this fiddle on a tour. Everyone thought that he was playing he played Guarneri's in those days, and most of his life, in fact. And we sat down, and something clicked with me, because I heard Ricci twice as a boy, and when I was studying in Auckland, I was very close to the front of the hall, and was absolutely blown away by the quality of sound. And I sat down with this guy and said, wait a minute, what year was that? And we worked it out, and it was the year that Ricci went on tour. And I can only sort of speculate, because I obviously don't know the dates exactly, but I wouldn't mind betting that what we heard and thought was his famous old violin was in fact this antiqued modern copy of something that Ricci was playing with great success.
Has that answered all your questions? I'm afraid we haven't time to answer any more, but we'll certainly go into this competition wiser for the experience of these 2 gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time and for your...